All right, sometime back, uh, Jack was riding the Sarah Bear Whiz Enduro down in Hattiesburg, Mississippi area, and he had a catastrophic uh, radiator hose explosion. I personally have never seen anything like that. Um, I'm going to try to get the video on here, and I hope I get it there. I'm not that talented, so but maybe it'll work. If not, you can look it up under Thomas Family Action Cam on YouTube, and it's near the end of his Sarah Bear Whiz Enduro run. I think he was riding pretty good. Anyway, they took this thing and had it looked at, and the radiator hoses were all replaced with some Samco Sport silicone hoses, which are really fine hoses, probably overkill for this thing. And still, we're continuing to have some issues. Jack's grandpa Vernon called me and said, "Hey, this thing is smoking. Will you take a look at it and see what's wrong?" Well, I watched a couple of his videos, and what I saw was steam. It wasn't two-stroke smoke. Every time Jack was stopped, this big plume of steam would come up around him. So I kind of thought that, okay, maybe we still have an overheating issue of some sort. And we all know from watching these things, and especially if you have one of these things, they run hot. Uh, Woods riding is not what they're designed to do. There's not enough airflow through them, which I have a potential fix for that. I'm going to show you in a few minutes. And they're made to run wide open on a motocross track, uh, continual airflow, and running wide open keeps this clutch pack engaged. And that is where a source of a lot of the heat is on these motors. In a wood riding situation, these things are slipping. Slipping is friction, friction is heat, and the heat transfers to the engine case, which transfers to the cylinder, and then the cooling system has to try to get rid of it. And we don't have a lot of cooling system on these little bikes. Um, when I got into this thing, um, this is the culprit. This is the water pump drive gear on the KTM 50 and the 65s actually. Um, you see this thing has no teeth. It's completely sheared off. There was zero water flow. The only way water was flowing through this thing was through a geothermal cycle where the water would go through the radiators and cool off a little bit, and just barely moving any water. So that overheated the whole thing again, um, and that's the root of the problem. Um, this thing also had a oil leak on the counter shaft, so we wanted to fix that. And the best way to do that, because it did have slack in the bearing and gear, KTM sells a transmission rebuild kit. It's $170 or so. It comes with both shafts and all four bearings to replace this thing, and the seals. Um, the water pump rebuild kit comes complete with bearings, gear, shaft, and two impellers. It comes with the impeller for the 50 and an impeller for the 65. Things I see online say put the 65 impeller in it. That greatly increases water flow. I'll try to attach a picture of the two impellers here. The 65 impeller is 30% larger, 40% larger. Um, there are some aftermarket billet impellers, aftermarket billet gears. There's a few things out there you can replace besides factory KTM stuff. Um, we also found clutch issues. The clutch basket, you can see, has teeth or two broken. The plates, just like on a big bike, they wear into the basket here and causes clutch engagement, disengagement issues. This is a relatively inexpensive part. It's maybe $60. These are the drive pins. They go here and then go into the primary drive gear, and the steel plates right here. And you can see, hopefully, these things groove up as well. So the combination of the two being grooved up causes clutch issues, won't properly engage and disengage. So we replace these as well. You can turn these 180 degrees and get some more life out of them, but in this case, had a screw break off. So the only way you can buy this is a complete kit from KTM with this drive plate, screws, and the pins. You can't buy just a regular pin. In working on this thing, taking it apart, I found that there are two parts between this pressure plate and the primary drive gear that you will not find on a microfiche anywhere or in the KTM service manual. There's two bevel spring washers that go between the primary drive gear and this plate. You can probably see there's a little bit of area here where you can see where it was sitting. Those two bevel washers go in opposing each other. The outer part of the bevel goes into the primary drive gear on one side, and the outer part goes onto the pressure plate on the other side, and the two small parts go in together, making a little hat in there, and that preloads this bottom pressure plate when you stack all your clutches. Now these clutches had to be replaced because they did not meet minimum specification anymore. And this particular one, there's barely any fiber material left on it at all. There again, KTM only sells these as a complete kit. It's a little pricey, but there again, this bike has 100 hours as far as we know. Also replaced all the bearings, obviously, because it came with the water pump and the transmission kit. These bearings are a bit of a bear to get out. I had to use a blind hole bearing puller. KTM manual recommends putting the engine cases in an oven, heat them to 150 degrees, then taking a wooden block and pound the cases down on it. My wife's not going to let me put this in the oven, so I took a propane torch and I heated the thing up. Be sure and wear some type of heat resistant glove, say a welding glove or something like that, and pop the engine cases down on the wood, and the bearings will fall out mostly. Like I said, these required a blind hole bearing puller to get them out. And while the case is still hot, you put the bearings back in. We also replaced the main bearings because they came out when you do that process, so might as well replace them. Basically, the only thing in this engine that is not brand new is the cylinder, and it met specifications. It got a new piston, and the connecting rod on the crankshaft, everything met specification there. So we're hoping this thing, it's going to be a brand new motor. We just have to get everything hooked back up. And I actually fired it up last night, and it runs pretty good. Still has some clutch adjustment. The clutch has click adjustments if you're familiar with the KTM 50, and the standard setting is 9 clicks. That puts the engagement at around 9,000 RPM. That's another reason these things build up so much heat. They have to run blue blazing RPM to even move. Every click, according to the KTM manual on the clickers, is about 250 RPM. You have to use a digital tachometer and set the clutch based on the tachometer and when the rear wheel moves. Some assembly tips. This is a printout from the KTM manual. KTMprint.com is KTM's website where you can go on there and purchase a shop manual. They're about 31, 32 bucks, depends on the bike, I'm sure. If you're going to be working on one of these things, you need the manual. If you're going to be working on any bike, you need the manual. That's what I was taught at Honda school a million years ago. You always get the manual out on what you're working on, have it on the bench so you can refer to it as needed. Nobody can remember everything about every bike. And what they stressed was a true professional always has the manual open. So keep the manual. It's worth it. It's worth the $30. I'm hoping you can see this picture here. This is the engine case on the clutch side. This is the starter idle gear. There's the starter gear. KTM shows to put all this stuff in that case and then slide the clutch cover over. I don't know what kind of voodoo magic you have to do that, but the clutch cover has the Kickstarter ratchet gear installed, which is what this spring is, and I'll get to that in just a minute. That spring, that idle gear won't go past that idle gear. So what I ended up doing was actually putting that gear along with the ratchet gear in the clutch cover, and it went together like butter. Another problem with these bikes is this spring. This is the Kickstart ratchet gear spring. This holds the Kickstart ratchet gear in the clutch cover. It's just friction. And what happens is these sides where it meets the clutch cover, there's a passage in the clutch cover where this goes, they wear. And as they wear, it allows the Kickstart ratchet gear to fall into the crankshaft ratchet gear. And that's not a good thing. It can cause some damage. It can cause some wear issues. So we replaced this spring, but even with the new spring, there was not enough friction there to hold the gear in place when I tried to put the clutch cover on. So I ended up spreading this out and then fine tuning it to where I had just enough friction in the cover to hold the gear when I turned it upside down, but not so much friction that it would not allow the gear to move freely for normal kickstart function. So that's about it on what we did to the motor. Oh, and by the way, these little bikes, they do require a special tool to put the top end on. You have to set the deck height. It comes with various base gaskets to get the piston and the top of the cylinder at the appropriate compression ratio. I bought the tool from Rocky Mountain. It's a Tusk tool. There's a bunch of others out there available, I'm sure. This thing was like 13 bucks. And there's a specification in the manual for setting that up. It requires a little bit of time. You have to pull the cylinder on and off a couple of times to get it right, but it's very important that happens. If you have too much deck height, obviously the piston sticking out of the cylinder, you run a chance of the piston hitting the cylinder head, and that gives you too much compression ratio anyway, and that can cause running issues. If you use too thin of a base gasket, you don't have enough compression ratio, and you're going to have a real loss of power there. So it's very important that the top end be set up properly. Now I'm going to move over here and change the camera a little bit, and I'm going to show you what I did to hopefully help improve the airflow on this bike. All right, after doing some internet research and looking at other bikes out there, I came up with the idea of adding an electric cooling fan. I've seen videos out there where guys add one fan on the KTMs. I haven't actually seen anything on the Mini. The Mini has a smaller frame, so it requires a little bit different setup. But I ended up putting twin 60 millimeter 12 volt fans. These are IP67 waterproof rated. That's not the best, but it's better than nothing. Bought some wiring stuff to hook everything up where it would last. These are attached to the radiators with zip ties. Zip ties go through the fins, and then I take another zip tie on the other side and run it through to lock it in place. There's also some weather stripping, thin weather stripping around the perimeter of the fan to cushion it against the fins so it doesn't damage the radiator itself. And the grill that's on the back here, that's part of the cooling fan, the fan kits. These are computer cooling fans. I made a Y fitting right here to hook up both fans, and there are connectors on there where you can run one or both fans. I don't really know when you'd want to run just one, but I did leave that option in place to where you could run just one. The battery, and I'll show you this in a sec, the battery is mounted under the front number plate. I took some 1/2 inch thick foam that I had lying around. If you've looked at my shop, you know I got stuff everywhere, and God knows where that foam came from, but I've had it for a while and it came in handy. I made a hot knife and I cut a little opening for the battery to sit in. It's just an RC type battery. These are the battery leads. This is the charge lead and this is the power lead. Just plug it in right there. Both fans are running. It's got some pretty good airflow. It's obviously better than no airflow. I have run this bike just a little bit, doing some tuning work on it. And as luck should have it, I found more cooling system issue troubles when I did that. Let me turn these fans off. I don't know how long this thing will run on a battery. I have personally run it 3 hours nonstop just as a test. And I don't know how long it'll run, but it'll run 3 hours, and we're not racing but 30 minutes as a rule. So the battery that's on this thing will last a good long time. As I said, I found some more problems with this bike, and it's probably all related to the big explosion that it had down at Sarah Bear Wiz when it blew the radiator hose. I believe it was this upper hose right here that it blew. It also damaged this right radiator. I use a cooling system vacuum filler tester, and this, of course, has a little bit smaller filler neck than most bikes or cars. I thought my adapter might have been leaking because I never could pull a vacuum, and I just thought, okay, it's my attachment here, so let's go on and fill this thing up. It holds 700 cc's roughly of coolant. And there's a process where you have to pick the front end up to make sure that you're getting plenty of coolant into the cylinder. There's no air pockets left. I went through all that, and I have developed a habit of leaving the radiator cap off during initial running. The reason I do that is in case there's any air trapped in the system, it'll burp it out, hopefully. Air is a problem. It will get trapped in there. Also, while I was running, I did the lifting. I believe KTM says 19 inches on the front wheel or so. You pick the front end up to burp the air out of the cylinder. But I left the cap on and let it run for a good while with the fans running, and it did pretty good. So I cut it off, and the next morning I come down and I see coolant on the lift. Started looking, and I found that the one or more of the passages on the right radiator evidently have a leak. So we're going to order a new radiator for this thing so we can have a proper cooling system. If you don't know the way the cooling system works, water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit unless it's under pressure, and then that temperature goes up exponentially. I'm not a physicist or an engineer. I can't tell you what it does. We don't run water. We run a water coolant mixture, which there again raises the boiling point of the coolant under pressure. Without that pressure, it's going to boil over at a lower temperature, around 212, 220 degrees with coolant or so, and that's what we don't want. So you can't have leaks in your cooling system. If you do, you're going to have a problem. We'll get that replaced. In riding these things, last weekend, CJ and the boys, Logan and Nolan, we went and rode their little 50s, and they rode with us, and that was about a disaster trying to get through the woods with those kids on those 50s. That trail was a little bit too advanced for them. But I have learned some things working on this bike and riding with the boys and seeing what kind of things we have there. They were running hot, so we pulled the radiator caps off after they cooled down and saw that they were low on coolant. Let me suggest, every time you ride one of these bikes, pull the radiator cap off. Make sure first and foremost that you have the appropriate amount of coolant. It should be 10 millimeters above the top of the radiator fins inside. Crank the bike up. Make sure you have water flow. That could be an impeller, or as you saw with the water pump gear over there, it could be that one of those two problems. Make sure that we have flow. Make sure that we have an adequate amount of coolant in the motorcycle every single time you take this thing out. Another tech tip that I'm going to throw at you, you can take it for what it's worth. These things slip in the clutch as much as they do and building up as much heat in the bottom end of these things. KTM suggests changing the oil in this bike every 10 hours. I say that's crap. I put the Motor X in this bike. This is ATF Dexron 3. It's the Motor X brand. I'm sure you can use whatever Dexron 3 you want, but I prefer to use factory lubricants in all my machines. This bike holds 200 cc's of oil. That means this quart will change this oil 5 times. Do the math. 5 times, 1 quart. It's not like a big bike where one time and you're done. Change the oil every time you ride. Especially if your child is not a AA rider on a 50 and the clutch is staying locked up all the time and you're getting plenty of flow and everything's cool. 99% of the kids riding these things are slipping the clutches like nobody's business. A lot of heat, a lot of friction. It's toasting the oil in there. Just change the oil. 200 cc's of oil. You got 5 changes out of a quart of oil. Remember, 5 changes of oil out of a quart. Yeah, that's a no-brainer. Just change it every time. You'll be glad you did. It'll save everything inside that motor. That may be overkill to some people, but it takes 10 minutes. It's worth the money. All right, I'm going to move on. I'm going to show you where I mounted the battery on this thing. All right, as I mentioned earlier, the battery is mounted behind the front number plate. That was the best place I could find on the 50 Mini. Put this thing. This is the foam that I mentioned earlier that I had laying around. I made a hot knife apparatus and cut a pocket to where it would fit down in there and still pad the back. It's obviously zip tied pretty snugly around the steering neck. And then there's another piece of foam block here to keep this whole apparatus from falling down. I found that if it falls down, it can interfere with the back of the number plate and the fender here and cause some potential steering issues. Steering issues is not something we need with these kids riding these bikes. So that right there should keep everything in place. The wires for the battery just run over the top of the triple tree here. We got a 1 wire for the charger and 1 wire for the power. You don't have to take anything off to plug into the charger or anything else. It's all right there. And the number plate just bolts right back in place. Hopefully we'll get all the parts for this thing next week. Got to get a radiator, as I said, and make sure this cooling system is solid again. Fill it back up and get it running like it's supposed to, and give it back to them and see how this experiment works. Obviously, these cooling fans are not going to be 100% to where you don't have to ride hard. You still need to ride to get the airflow through the thing. Hope some of this tech information helps. There'll be more episodes of Garage Talk coming down the line, I've got some plans for some other things. I mentioned earlier I'm going to do an extended episode on the old dragster out there. Hopefully we can maybe even talk with old Charles Parker on this thing. We can talk about the old days because, we're old. But down there at the bottom, that subscribe button, how about click on that? And doesn't cost you anything. Doesn't mean anything other than the fact that it helps me. And whenever we get some new content posted online, you'll be notified on your YouTube page, and you can take a look at it. And if you like it, great, hit that button. Anyway, that'll end this episode, and appreciate you watching. Can't wait till the next time.